A huge issue with the internet today is people taking short form content and using it for educational purposes. I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be making decisions based on a 30-second video that you watched while you were on the toilet. So I'm here to save you today because unfortunately in those 30-second clips that you're watching about fantasy football, everybody's lying to you. I'm breaking it all down with numbers and statistics to show you why you're being misled right now. Make sure you hit that like button and stick around for the entire video. You're not going to want to miss what we're going to talk about today. And when you get done with this video, if you think that it was one of the better fantasy videos that you've seen this offseason, you should consider buying our draft guide. Right now, it's only $21.99. We've kept it at the same price for a couple of years now, but we keep adding more content. In fact, our draft guide typically drops on July 1st. It's been available since April, and we're adding new content or updating it on a continuous basis all the way until week 1 of the regular season. If there's anything that changes in the fantasy landscape, you're gonna get our take on it right away. So if you wanna get your draft guide right now, the link is in the description of this video. Head on over to our website, get your draft guide right now. It's gonna be electronically delivered to you, and you're gonna get instant access to some of the best fantasy knowledge you can find on the market today. All right, let me clue you in on this big secret that's being kept from you and why you're consistently being lied to. It has to do with the running back versus wide receiver debate. And over the last couple of years, we've seen the message consistently being pushed to you all that wide receivers are better, that you should be drafting wide receivers early and often, zero running back strategy is the best strategy, and we continue to throw numbers up on the screen that just proves that's inaccurate. And the argument for the importance of the wide receiver position now has several different points. It could be anything from it's a pass-happy league now in the NFL. It could be the fact that a lot of fantasy leagues have started playing 3 wide receivers instead of just 2, and the running back position only has 2 spots. And also it could be that running backs, they just don't get the workload that they used to. But even with all of those arguments, I'm getting ready to show you why paying attention to the running back position is the key to being successful in fantasy football. Now, I will say this, if you're interested in drafting a wide receiver in the first round, go ahead. You can still pay a strong importance to the running back position. Do you want to go wide receiver, wide receiver? I don't love it nearly as much, but if you do that, you still have to pay attention to the running back position. Do you want to go balanced to begin with? Wide receiver, running back, wide receiver. That's fine. You still have to pay attention to the running back position. You cannot start your draft by going wild at wide receiver, potentially drafting a quarterback and or a tight end, and then waiting till like 5 or 6 rounds in to find your running backs. You're playing with fire. Now, over the last few weeks, I've done an assessment on all of the main positions in fantasy football, talking about how risky those positions are. Now, we're going to focus in on running backs and wide receivers today, but I want to condense all of this information together to show you why running backs are so important. Let's go ahead and take a look at the overall data to start with. Everything that I found in the 2 videos that I did, assessing the riskiest wide receivers and the riskiest running backs. So if you missed these videos, let me give you a quick rundown here. I broke down the top 24 running backs based on their current ADP. So if there's a running back or a wide receiver that you don't see in here, it's because they are not currently inside the top 24 at their position for ADP. And I went through and I pulled the numbers on where each of these players finished for all of their games last season, and then they were assigned points. The higher you finish, the less points you got. The lower you finish, the more points you got. Then at the end, they were assigned a risk score. And how we got to that, we just added up all of the points that they received based on where they finished in each game, and then we divided it by the number of games they played last season. And the whole purpose of this series, which I've been doing for 3 years now, is just to find out how risky some of these players were last season based on where they finished in total points. We want guys that are going to give us more consistent fantasy points. If you give me 5 games of 30 plus points, that's great. But what if you give me like 9 games of 10 or fewer points? That is what we are trying to assess. Now, the big thing that we're doing here is taking a look at the different categories that we assessed. How many times did a player finish top 12 at their position? How many times did they finish 13 through 24? How many times did they finish 25 through 36? And how many times did they finish outside the top 36? The more times you finish as a running back or wide receiver 3, or the more times you finish outside the top 36, the higher your risk score is likely going to be, because those are the type of finishes that can hurt us on a weekly basis. So first off, based on this year's current ADP, how many of these players finished inside the top 12 at their position last season? This past season, the top 24 wide receivers you're investing in right now finished as a wide receiver 1 106 times. That is a difference of 23 games. The top running backs being drafted this season finished inside the top 12 at their position 23 more times than the wide receivers finished inside the top 12 of their position last year. Now, obviously, we want our players to finish inside the top 12 every single week, but it's not going to happen. Sometimes we're going to get RB2 and wide receiver 2 performances. That's not really that big of a deal. What do the numbers look like in that area? Well, it was a dead heat. The top 24 players at running back and wide receiver right now, based on ADP, each had 80 finishes from RB13 or wide receiver 13 down to RB24 or wide receiver 24. Now, I've got absolutely no issue with these type of performances. This is a good, safe floor, because for the most part, you're still going to be getting a decent amount of fantasy points if they finish inside the top 24. It's not until we get from 25 to 36 that things can start to hurt us. And last season, more of the current top 24 ADP running backs finished inside the top 36 than what our current top 24 ADP wide receivers did, by 2 games. So again, not that big of a difference here. Everybody that we're investing in highly right now at both of these positions gave us pretty consistent numbers when it came to wide receiver and RB2s, wide receiver and RB3s. Really, at this point, the biggest difference has been RB1s and wide receiver 1s. So we are seeing a little bit of a higher ceiling with the running backs. But sometimes a higher ceiling doesn't always equate to fantasy wins. Sometimes we need to make sure that the floor that we're investing in is enough to help us get over the edge as well. Well, I'll tell you what, the numbers are not close. For the amount of times that these players finished outside the top 36 at their position last season, wide receivers dominated this category by 45 games. It wasn't even close. The top 24 wide receivers in terms of their current ADP right now finished outside the top 36 108 times. The top 24 running backs based on ADP currently only finished outside the top 36 63 times. That is a staggering number, and it shows us that the floor for your wide receivers is once again going to be way lower than the floor for your running backs. And I want to remind everybody that this isn't necessarily telling you that you need to draft a running back early or that you need to draft running back heavy. The only thing these numbers are telling us is that the variance in wide receiver scoring is way bigger than the variance in running back scoring. Because the top 24 running backs finished as an RB1 way more often than the top 24 wide receivers finished as a wide receiver 1. But then the top 24 wide receivers finished outside the top 36 way more often than the top 24 running backs. That is where you get into trouble with fantasy football, when you have a roster filled with guys that you really never know what you're going to get on a consistent basis. In a best ball league, it doesn't really matter because they're going to be replaced by whoever the highest scorer is. So even if your studs have a bad week, hopefully somebody on your bench had a really good week. But in redraft leagues, we're constantly starting our studs. We talk about it all the time. How often are you going to sit somebody that you drafted inside the top 24 of their position? So if your wide receivers are finishing outside the top 36 more often than your running backs, that is really going to hurt you in certain weeks, meaning that you need to have a really tough stable of running backs that you can consistently count on. There are currently 2 running backs inside the top 24 ADP of running backs that had 9 or more RB1 performances last season. There was only 1 wide receiver inside the top 24 ADP that had 9 or more wide receiver 1 finishes. Now, that's not that big of a difference, but at the next level, it gets way bigger because there are 8 running backs inside the top 24 running back ADP that had 7 or more RB1 performances last year. But there are only 4 wide receivers currently inside the top 24 wide receiver ADP that had 7 or more wide receiver 1 performances last year. Once again, the ceiling goes to the running backs. And not only that, all of those numbers that I showed you at the beginning of the video, those colored columns showed you the risk score. And the risk score essentially tells us that the lower the score, the less risky that running back or wide receiver was. They were more consistent with their finishes. They had a lot more higher finishes and they had fewer low-end finishes. Out of the 24 running backs that I took a look at, there were 12 running backs that scored 2.3 or lower. That's good. However, there were only 4 wide receivers that scored 2.3 or lower. The reason being is that way more often the top wide receivers finished outside the top 36 than what the top running backs did. Of the 24 wide receivers we looked at, 17 wide receivers finished outside the top 36 4 or more times. There were only 5 running backs that finished outside the top 36 running backs 4 or more times. There were only 2 running backs that came in with a risk score of 3 or higher when I did these calculations. There were 7 wide receivers that came in with a risk score of 3 or higher. The numbers don't lie. The variance in wide receiver finishes continues to be way larger than the variance in running back finishes. And there's a few different ways that you could do this video. I know some people are going to comment and say, but Kyle, why are you looking at the current ADP? Why aren't you taking a look at the numbers based on the ADP from last year or where guys actually finished from last year? The answer is super simple. It's because we're evaluating the guys that are going to take our top picks here in 2024. Yeah, we could go back and look at any of the information that we want to from last year, whether it be final placement or whether it be where they were at in terms of ADP. But what about a guy like Raheem Mostert? Last year he finished as the RB2, but this season he's not even going inside the top 24 running backs for ADP. I don't know why, I don't get it, it's ridiculous, it's whatever. But there are a lot of guys going ahead of him. So what we're evaluating right now is what's some of the risk factor for some of the guys that we are drafting over Raheem Mostert. Same thing could be said for wide receivers. We're evaluating guys inside the top 24. And if we find some of these guys to be way too risky, maybe in terms of our ADP, they're not going to be inside the top 24, which means we could bump a different wide receiver or running back up into our consensus top 24, and we'll draft him a couple of rounds earlier and get ahead of him while other people are just blindly following the ADP. Ladies and gentlemen, at the Fantasy Headliners, we're playing chess. We're not playing checkers. That's how you get to be a fantasy football champion. That's how you get to the point where year after year after year, you're competing in your fantasy leagues, because we're diving into things like this, helping you find the information that nobody else is talking about. So the next time you're sitting on the toilet watching YouTube Shorts or Facebook Reels or something on TikTok, and you see a fantasy football content creator give you a 30-second video on why they're drafting as many wide receivers as possible, I want you to remember this video right here and why you're being told one of the biggest lies in fantasy football. Headliner Nation, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is one of the best videos that I put out every single year. I absolutely love collecting this data, and so far over the last few seasons, everybody has loved this series. And we got tons of more content coming this offseason, so make sure you like the video, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell notifications. Anytime we go live, anytime we drop new content, you're gonna know about it right away. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm gonna go ahead and get on out of here. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.